Ella loved the land, the sun-baked earth, the whispering grasses, the way the wind smelled like rain and sage. Her ranch, a small spread nestled beside the creek, was everything. She'd built it with her own 2 hands after her husband passed, pouring every ounce of love and sweat into its dusty acres. Her days were filled with the rhythm of ranch life, mending fences, tending to her small herd of cattle, and watching the sun paint the sky in fiery hues each evening. She knew every inch of her property, every twist in the creek, every gnarled branch of the old oak tree that stood sentinel near the house. It was more than just land. It was a part of her, a living testament to her resilience and her connection to the wild heart of the West. Her life was simple, perhaps, but it was hers, filled with a quiet joy that hummed beneath the surface of her weathered skin. Little did she know that peace was about to be shattered. The dust cloud appeared on the horizon like a gathering storm, growing larger with each passing minute. Ella squinted, her hand shading her eyes. She recognized the riders now, the men of Barlow, Thornton, and Reeves, the cattle barons who ruled the county with iron fists and bottomless greed. They rode hard, their faces grim, their intentions clear. Barlow, a man whose belly strained against his waistcoat, was in the lead. He reined in his horse, the animal snorting and pawing at the ground. "Ella," he boomed, his voice rough as gravel. "We've come to talk about your land." Ella stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. "There's nothing to talk about, Barlow. This land is mine." Thornton, lean and cruel-eyed, stepped forward. "Not anymore, it ain't. We need this land for our cattle. You're in the way." Reeves, the quietest but perhaps the most dangerous of the three, simply smirked. He knew they had the power, the law, and the guns on their side. Ella was alone. The eviction was swift and brutal. They didn't even give her time to pack. Her few belongings were tossed into the dirt, the house boarded up, and her cattle driven off with the Baron's own herds. Ella watched, her heart a cold stone in her chest, as her life was stolen before her very eyes. As the dust settled and the Barons rode away, a single tear traced a path down Ella's weathered cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of rage. A slow-burning, simmering fury began to build within her. She wouldn't beg. She wouldn't plead. She would take back what was hers, but not in the way they expected. She thought of their sons, their pampered, entitled heirs, growing up soft and ignorant of the true cost of their father's wealth. An idea, dark and unsettling, began to form in her mind. It was a dangerous game, a twisted form of justice, but it was the only way she could see to truly hurt them. She would take their sons, and she would teach them what it meant to earn something, to fight for something, to truly understand the value of what had been stolen. And then they would help her take it back. Ella spent weeks observing the Baron's sons, learning their routines, their weaknesses, their dependencies. Caleb Barlow was the eldest, a spoiled gambler with a penchant for fancy clothes and fast horses. Daniel Thornton was the scholar, more comfortable with books than cattle, but quick-witted and observant. Samuel Reeves was the youngest, barely a man, but already displaying a cruel streak that mirrored his father's. Her plan was intricate, relying on stealth, misdirection, and a healthy dose of audacity. She enlisted the help of a few disgruntled townsfolk, people who had also been wronged by the Barons and were willing to risk everything for a chance at retribution. They provided her with information, supplies, and a safe haven in the mountains, a hidden cabin where she could train the boys without detection. One by one, they disappeared. Caleb was snatched from a poker game. Daniel lured away from his books with a false promise of rare manuscripts, and Samuel ambushed while hunting. The Barons were furious, their power and influence suddenly useless against an enemy they couldn't see, an enemy who knew them better than they knew themselves. They had no idea that their own sons were about to become weapons against them. The cabin was small and cramped, a stark contrast to the opulent homes the boys were used to. Caleb, still dressed in his velvet jacket, cursed and demanded to know who had dared to abduct him. Daniel, ever the pragmatist, assessed their surroundings, his eyes sharp and calculating. Samuel, fueled by a mixture of fear and bravado, threatened violence, unaware of the irony. Ella watched them, her face unreadable. "You're here because your fathers are thieves," she said, her voice low but firm. "They stole what was rightfully mine, and now you will pay the price." Caleb scoffed. "My father would burn this whole mountain down to get me back." "Perhaps," Ella replied, "but by the time he finds you, you won't be the same boy he lost." She handed them each a rough spun shirt and a pair of worn trousers. "Strip down. Your new life starts now." Their initial reactions were a mix of anger, confusion, and disbelief. They were used to getting their way, to being obeyed. They had no idea what Ella had in store for them, the hard lessons they were about to learn, or the roles they were destined to play in the coming revolution. The training was brutal. Ella pushed them harder than they had ever been pushed before. They learned to ride, to shoot, to track, to hunt. She taught them how to build a fire in the rain, how to find water in the desert, how to survive on nothing but their wits. Caleb's gambling skills translated surprisingly well to strategy. Daniel's intellect made him a quick study in tactics, and Samuel, despite his cruelty, possessed a natural talent for fighting. But the physical challenges were only part of it. Ella also began to reveal the truth about their fathers, the lies, the corruption, the exploitation that fueled their wealth. She showed them the faces of the families they had ruined, the land they had stolen, the lives they had destroyed. She made them understand the true cost of their privileged lives. At first, they resisted. It was easier to cling to the image of their fathers as powerful, benevolent men. But as they toiled alongside Ella, as they saw the evidence of their fathers' misdeeds firsthand, cracks began to appear in their carefully constructed worldview. Doubt crept in, followed by anger, and finally, a grudging respect for the woman who had taken everything from them, but was now giving them something even more valuable, the truth. As the weeks turned into months, something unexpected began to blossom between Ella and the heirs. The shared hardships, the grueling training, and the weight of the truth forged a bond that transcended their initial animosity. They started to rely on each other, to trust each other, to see each other not just as captor and captives, but as fellow survivors. Ella, hardened by loss and driven by revenge, found herself softening around the edges. She saw in them a potential for good, a chance to break the cycle of corruption that had plagued the West for so long. She taught them not just how to survive, but how to care, how to fight for something bigger than themselves. Caleb, Daniel, and Samuel, in turn, began to see Ella not as a vengeful kidnapper, but as a strong, resilient woman who had been wronged and was determined to right the scales of justice. They saw a maternal figure in her, someone who pushed them, challenged them, and ultimately believed in them more than their own fathers ever had. They began to call her Ma, a silent acknowledgement of the role she had unwittingly taken in their lives. The line between revenge and family was blurring, creating a complex and unsettling dynamic in the mountain cabin. The fragile peace was shattered one moonless night. Samuel, still wrestling with his loyalty to his father, slipped away from the cabin. He was young, scared, and desperately missed the comforts of his old life. He believed his father, despite everything Ella had said, would protect him. Caleb discovered Samuel's absence first. He woke Daniel, and together they tracked him through the dense forest. They found him just as he reached the edge of the mountain, ready to descend into the valley below. "Samuel, stop," Caleb called out, his voice echoing in the stillness of the night. Samuel hesitated, his eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. "I can't do this," he said, his voice trembling. "I have to go home." Daniel stepped forward, his expression grim. "Going home means going back to lies, Samuel. It means betraying everything we've learned here." A struggle ensued, a desperate fight between brothers torn between loyalty and newfound conviction. Ella arrived just as Caleb tackled Samuel, preventing him from escaping. The air crackled with tension, the weight of their decision hanging heavy in the air. Ella looked at them, her eyes filled with a mixture of disappointment and understanding. "What do we do with him?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The answer would define them all. Samuel's attempted escape solidified their commitment. He was forgiven, but understood that another act of betrayal would not be tolerated. The incident served as a catalyst, pushing them further down the path of rebellion. Ella knew it was time to put their training to the test. Their target was Barlow's Supply Depot, a heavily guarded warehouse filled with goods stolen from struggling farmers. Ella devised a plan that leveraged each of their strengths. Caleb's strategic mind, Daniel's knowledge of the depot's layout gleaned from stolen documents, and Samuel's agility in navigating the shadows. Under the cover of darkness, they infiltrated the depot, moving with a newfound confidence and precision. They disabled the guards, secured the perimeter, and redistributed the stolen goods back to their rightful owners. The raid was a complete success, executed flawlessly and without bloodshed. The news of the raid spread like wildfire, emboldening the oppressed and striking fear into the hearts of the barons. Ella and the heirs had proven they were a force to be reckoned with. More importantly, they had proven it to themselves. They were no longer just victims or pampered heirs. They were outlaws, fighting for justice, and they were good at it. The raid on Barlow's Depot was a declaration of war. The other cattle barons, Thornton and Reeves, understood the threat that Ella and the heirs posed. They couldn't allow this rebellion to fester. They pooled their resources, hiring ruthless mercenaries and tightening their grip on the county. Their retaliation was swift and brutal. They burned the farms of anyone suspected of aiding Ella, intimidated the townspeople into silence, and offered a hefty reward for her capture, dead or alive. The mountain cabin, once a safe haven, became a target. Ella knew they had to move. They relocated to a series of hidden caves deeper in the mountains, constantly on the run, always looking over their shoulders. The conflict escalated, transforming from a targeted act of revenge into a full-blown struggle for survival. The heirs, once sheltered and naive, were now hardened fighters, facing down danger with a grim determination. They knew their fathers would stop at nothing to crush them, and they were prepared to meet them head-on. The revolution had begun in earnest, and there was no turning back. Despite the barons' intimidation tactics, a flicker of hope began to ignite in the hearts of the townspeople. They had witnessed firsthand the barons' cruelty and corruption for too long, and Ella's actions, though drastic, resonated with their own suppressed desires for justice. Whispers of support turned into acts of defiance. Farmers secretly provided Ella and the heirs with food and supplies, risking their own safety to aid the outlaws. Merchants turned a blind eye to their presence in town, offering them shelter and information. Even the local sheriff, a man caught between his duty and his conscience, began to subtly undermine the barons' efforts. The townspeople saw in Ella and the heirs a chance for a better future, a world free from the barons' tyranny. They understood that the revolution was not just about Ella's land, but about their own freedom. They knew the risks were high, but they were willing to fight alongside Ella, to stand up against the oppressors, and to create a new West where justice prevailed. Their support, though often hidden and subtle, was a lifeline for Ella and the heirs, a reminder that they were not alone in their struggle. It fueled their determination and strengthened their resolve to fight on, no matter the cost. The inevitable showdown took place in the heart of town, during a festival meant to appease the increasingly restless populace. Ella and the heirs, bolstered by a handful of brave townspeople, confronted the cattle barons and their mercenaries in a chaotic and bloody battle. Guns blazed, fists flew, and the air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Caleb's strategic mind proved invaluable, but the mercenaries were well-trained and ruthless. Daniel's quick thinking saved lives, but the odds were stacked against them. Samuel fought with a ferocity born of guilt and a desire for redemption, but even his skill couldn't stem the tide. In the midst of the chaos, tragedy struck. A stray bullet found its mark, hitting one of the heirs, Daniel. He fell, clutching his chest, his eyes wide with disbelief. Ella rushed to his side, but it was too late. He was gone. Daniel's death was a devastating blow, a crushing loss that threatened to shatter their resolve. Grief and anger washed over them, threatening to consume them. But amidst the pain, a new determination emerged. They would not let Daniel's sacrifice be in vain. They would fight on, not just for revenge, but for the future he had believed in. The revolution had claimed its first martyr, and the fight was far from over. Daniel's death marked a turning point. Caleb and Samuel, no longer bound by the vestiges of their former lives, fully embraced their roles as outlaws. The fight was no longer just about revenge or reclaiming Ella's land. It was about justice, about creating a better world for those who had been wronged by the barons. They donned black bandanas, becoming symbols of defiance and hope for the oppressed. Caleb, with his strategic mind and newfound ruthlessness, became a brilliant tactician, planning daring raids and ambushes against the barons' forces. Samuel, fueled by guilt and a thirst for redemption, transformed into a formidable fighter, protecting the innocent and striking fear into the hearts of the wicked. They were no longer the pampered sons of cattle barons, but something far more dangerous. Men with a cause, men with nothing to lose, men willing to fight to the death for what they believed in. They became legends in their own right, whispered about in hushed tones around campfires and saloons. The next generation of outlaws, born from revenge and forged in the fires of revolution. They were ready for the final confrontation, the showdown that would decide the fate of the West. Ella, Caleb, and Samuel cornered Barlow in his opulent mansion, a symbol of his ill-gotten wealth. Thornton and Reeves were dead, casualties of the escalating conflict. Barlow, the lead cattle baron, the one who had first set his sights on Ella's land, stood alone, his face a mask of fear and desperation. "It's over, Barlow," Ella said, her voice cold and resolute. "Your reign of terror ends here." Caleb and Samuel flanked her, their guns drawn, their eyes filled with a burning intensity. They were no longer the boys Barlow had known, but hardened men, forged in the crucible of violence and driven by a thirst for justice. Barlow pleaded for his life, offering them money, power, anything to spare him. But his words fell on deaf ears. They had seen too much, lost too much, to be swayed by his empty promises. The final confrontation was swift and brutal. A gunfight erupted, the echoes of gunfire reverberating through the mansion. In the end, Barlow lay dead, his empire crumbling around him. Ella had her revenge, and the heirs had avenged their brother. But the fight was far from over. They had won a battle, but the war for the soul of the West was just beginning. With Barlow dead, the remaining mercenaries scattered, and the Baron's empire in ruins, a new era dawned in the West. Ella, Caleb, and Samuel, hailed as heroes by the oppressed, set about dismantling the corrupt system that had plagued the region for so long. Ella reclaimed her land, rebuilding her ranch and turning it into a haven for those who had been wronged by the barons. Caleb, using his strategic mind and knowledge of the barons' operations, helped redistribute their wealth to the struggling farmers and townsfolk. Samuel, driven by his desire for redemption, became a protector of the innocent, ensuring that no one would ever suffer the same fate as Daniel. The townspeople, emboldened by their victory, formed a council to govern themselves, ensuring that the voices of the oppressed would finally be heard. A new sense of hope and justice swept through the West, replacing the fear and corruption of the past. Ella, Caleb, and Samuel had achieved the impossible. They had transformed a personal vendetta into a full-blown revolution, ushering in a new era of freedom and equality. The West was still wild and dangerous, but now it was also a place where justice could prevail, where the oppressed could rise up, and where even the sons of corrupt cattle barons could find redemption. Years passed. Ella, her hair now silvered by time, sat on the porch of her rebuilt ranch, watching the sun set over the vast landscape. The West was changing slowly but surely, thanks to the seeds of revolution she had sown. Caleb, now a respected leader in the town council, continued to fight for the rights of the oppressed, ensuring that the lessons he had learned in the mountains were never forgotten. Samuel, still haunted by Daniel's death, dedicated his life to protecting the vulnerable, becoming a symbol of justice and redemption for the entire region. The story of Ella and the heirs became a legend, passed down through generations, inspiring countless others to stand up against injustice and fight for what was right. The new generation of outlaws, born from revenge and forged in the fires of revolution, left a lasting legacy on the West, transforming it into a place where even the most unlikely of heroes could rise up and change the world. And as Ella watched the sunset, she knew that her twisted act of revenge had ultimately become something far greater. A testament to the power of maternal rage, the enduring spirit of justice, and the transformative potential of even the most unlikely of alliances. The West would never be the same.